All right, let's jump right into this explainer. If you've been following the standard advice about just cutting calories to lose belly fat as you get older, well, you might actually be doing more harm than good. Today, we're going to unpack the exact dietary strategies and clinical guidelines that medical professionals use to safely target metabolic health, all without sacrificing your physical strength.
So, is losing weight over 60 actually making you frailer? It's a pretty wild clinical paradox, right? We're constantly told that dropping pounds is the key to longevity. But for adults over 60, simple calorie restriction might actually be accelerating the aging process. By just eating less, you might be shrinking your scale weight, but inadvertently making your body significantly frailer and much more prone to physical disability. To understand why this happens and how we can fix it through targeted nutrition, we really need to look at what's going on inside the body.
Section 1. The visceral fat threat.
You see, the invisible epidemic driving metabolic decline isn't just about how much fat you have, but rather where it's stored. Unlike harmless subcutaneous fat, the kind you can just pinch under your skin, toxic visceral fat wraps tightly around your deep internal organs, like your liver, pancreas, and intestines. And it isn't just an inactive storage unit, it's highly active. Because of its location, it drains directly into your portal vein, aggressively pumping free fatty acids straight into your liver. This immediately triggers insulin resistance and dyslipidemia. In fact, visceral fat acts just like a highly active endocrine organ. As we age, these deep fat cells become senescent. Basically, they get old, stay alive, and start acting up. They create this chronic state known as inflammaging. They are literally pumping out pro-inflammatory cytokines like TNF-alpha and IL-6 straight into your bloodstream 24/7. This low-grade systemic inflammation impairs your insulin signaling and significantly accelerates cardiovascular disease. It's essentially a biological fire burning quietly in the background.
Now, here's where it gets super interesting. Unmanaged stress? It directly feeds this belly fat. Visceral fat cells actually have 4 times the density of cortisol receptors compared to regular fat. Even worse, they contain an enzyme called 11-beta-HSD1 that locally creates even more active cortisol right inside the fat cell. So if you have flattened daily cortisol curves from chronic stress, poor sleep, or, ironically enough, from highly restrictive crash dieting, your body preferentially drives every bit of spare energy straight into your belly fat.
Section 2. The sarcopenic obesity trap. So how do standard everyday dieting strategies actually make this age-related fat buildup worse? Well, this is exactly where the old eat less, move more mantra completely falls apart for older adults. It leads straight into the trap of sarcopenic obesity, which is this dangerous combination of excess toxic fat and declining muscle mass. The paradox here is that when older adults simply cut 500 to 700 calories out of their day without the proper clinical protocols, they inadvertently destroy their metabolically active muscle tissue. You lose weight, sure, but you're losing the absolute wrong kind of weight.
Get this, when older adults go on a standard diet, a shocking 25% of the weight they lose is actually precious lean muscle and bone density. Losing that much muscle absolutely tanks your resting metabolic rate, making it so much easier to regain the fat later on. Plus, it directly causes physical frailty, mobility issues, and drastically increases the risk of falls. You're basically curing the obesity by causing sarcopenia, which is just an unacceptable clinical trade-off.
Section 3. Strategic nutrition and protein.
Okay, to fight this dual threat, we have to pivot to evidence-based dietary strategies. Your primary clinical target, 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight every single day. If you're over 60 and trying to lose weight, this should make up about 25 to 30% of your total daily energy intake. And listen, this isn't a suggestion. It's a strict physiological requirement to preserve your muscle mass and bone density while you're in a caloric deficit.
Now, you might be wondering, why is that protein target so high? It's because older adults suffer from something called anabolic resistance. As you age, your skeletal muscle basically gets stubborn. It shows a blunted response to the protein you eat. A young person might build muscle easily from a small piece of chicken, but an older adult requires a much higher dose of high-quality, leucine-rich protein just to flip the biological switch. That switch is known as the mTRC1 pathway, and it's what stimulates muscle protein synthesis. You literally have to overwhelm the resistance with strategic protein dosing.
When we break down our specific dietary weapons, very low carbohydrate diets are incredibly effective for acute, rapid visceral fat loss. They yield a 3-fold greater loss of deep belly fat compared to standard diets by heavily suppressing insulin. But the Mediterranean diet is arguably better for long-term health. It actively reduces that systemic inflammation we talked about earlier and does a much better job of preserving your total body water and lean mass. And finally, simply adding 10 grams of soluble fiber a day, something like psyllium, actively changes your gut microbiota. These microbes ferment the fiber into short-chain fatty acids that literally halt visceral fat storage right at the cellular level.
Section 4. Multi-component exercise protocols. But hey, nutrition alone isn't going to completely rescue our metabolism. Diet strips the fat, sure, but exercise shields the muscle. A multi-component training program is the absolute clinical gold standard here. You can't just walk on a treadmill and call it a day. You need aerobic training to burn the systemic fat and improve your cardiovascular fitness, but critically, you have to combine it with progressive resistance training to protect your bones and signal your body to hold onto its muscle mass. High-intensity interval training, or HIIT, is also fantastic for rapidly improving insulin sensitivity. And targeted core stabilization, that's totally required to protect your spine as your body composition changes over time. The hard data from the landmark ALTO trial comprehensively proves exactly why we need both. When older adults combined diet and exercise, they saw a massive 21% improvement in functional performance. That is nearly double the improvement of just dieting alone. The combined approach completely changed the cellular makeup of their bodies. It preserved myocellular quality, meaning the actual health and function of the muscle fibers, even while they were eating fewer calories.
Section 5. The complete clinical blueprint. All right, let's tie all this science together into a highly practical roadmap for metabolic recovery. This 4-step blueprint is exactly how medical professionals safely target visceral fat in older adults. It starts with step 1, baseline screening. You need a DEXA scan to know exactly how much muscle and visceral fat you actually have. Step 2 is your nutritional lever, creating a moderate 500-calorie deficit, but flooding the body with that 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilo of protein alongside plenty of soluble fiber. Step 3 is the execution of both resistance and aerobic exercise. And finally, step 4, which is so often the missing link, managing your sleep and stress. I want to zoom in on that final step for a second, because we really can't ignore that sleep fragmentation will just completely ruin your dietary efforts. If you have undiagnosed obstructive sleep apnea, your airway is collapsing at night. This lack of oxygen sends your body into an absolute panic, activating your sympathetic nervous system. This causes massive late-day and nighttime spikes in cortisol. And remember what we learned about cortisol? It directly drives energy straight back into your visceral fat depots. If you don't fix your sleep, you're constantly fighting an uphill battle against your own fat cells. So here we are at the ultimate takeaway. Yes, aging is inevitable, but frailty and metabolic decline, they absolutely are not. You've got the clinical blueprint now. High-leucine protein to break anabolic resistance, soluble fiber to hack your gut microbiome, multi-component exercise to shield your muscle, and sleep optimization to shut down the cortisol fat storage loop. The real question is, how will you use this blueprint to take control of your metabolic destiny starting today? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.